Please welcome Ian Ailles.
Great, thank you for the appropriate soundtrack. Good morning, everyone. Apologies, I may fade slightly as I'm suffering under a bit of a cold. I was going to say my speech had been written before Justine's change of schedule, so perhaps I should say thank you to the recently departed Right Honourable Justine Greening for her time this morning. Also, thank you to ABTA for bringing us all together today. I think, we've all heard in those last 15 minutes or so, some really positive comments and comments that I think we can all bite on. I think what I heard was informed decision making. I heard medium and long term. I heard continuity. I certainly heard a focus around delivery, and I'd certainly pick up something that Daisy said about seeing something through around ATOL reform. So I've been asked to present the industry view this morning, to give the operator, the retailer voice for the industry. And perhaps as I start, I wanted to outline, three themes for our policy agenda. Certainly there's one theme which is about getting the infrastructure right. And whether that be ports or airports or rail, it's about the comprehensive infrastructure. I think the second, and perhaps I heard less of this morning, but it's about creating a level playing field, something where we are all commercial firms and that we all compete in a commercial world. And then the third is about, what I would call managing UK PLC. So, what about getting the infrastructure right? It's essential, for example, that we have the right number of airports of the right size, where they're needed and with the right operations in place. We absolutely understand that that is a long-term issue, that something needs to be managed, and we need clarity, so we need clarity of decision-making. What we also need is addressing the current. And Justine talked about our short-term issues, the fact that today we have an issue with border controls. That impacts our customers, that impacts the public perception, not only in the UK, but of potential visitors to the UK, and enforces costs on us as commercial operators. So what we need is a joined-up public policy strategy. Yes, it's got to be transport, but yes, it's got to be the Home Offices. They've got to work together to get to that strategy. Government needs to ensure that the longer-term infrastructure is fit for purpose, fit for our customers' purpose, and whether that's airports themselves or access to them. This is vital for inbound tourism as much as outbound tourism. The impact of government policy is not limited to the British public going on overseas holidays. It affects those who come here, and it directly impacts on the wealth and reputation of the UK. Hand in hand with a viable airport strategy goes investment in our rail network. What's important for the travel industry and its customers, and indeed UK PLC, is that this is a joined-up strategy that works together. And Justine certainly highlighted that around the Olympics. But it's about the longer term. It's about addressing the bottlenecks, focusing and planning for the future. And we know that anything to do with transport is all about long-term planning. And perhaps it's easy to miss important dates. Take, for example, the new Terminal 2 at Heathrow, which will be conveniently ready soon after the Olympics finishes. I also asked the government here and now for a level playing field in how we treat and protect our customers. The playing field is often distorted when it comes to how the government regulates the travel industry. A perfect example, and there are many I could have chosen, is that as an industry, we've just had our debit and credit card charges reviewed and changed. However, it would seem that a certain budget airline refuses to fall in line with industry standards, giving them a competitive price advantage in what's already a hugely competitive market. So if the government wants to put more regulation in place for us, then it has to be sensible regulation, but it also needs to be enforced fully and fairly. It's about running the things that have been put in place. You heard Justine say about it's not about bills, but once they're enacted, they need to be followed through. So, back to the detail of the policy agenda. I'll start with one of the most recent and topical debates in travel, the stay-at-home campaign. And perhaps you'll indulge me if you remember a year ago, one of my roles was to run one of the most successful UK-based operators. With so much reputation invested in the Olympics and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, we believe that it's utterly wrong for the government to fund marketing of UK holidays to the UK public, telling them that staying at home is the only way to support the UK. Surely a healthy and thriving tourism industry is one that is inclusive of inbound, domestic and outbound sectors. That will underpin a successful, growing and dynamic UK economy. The economic contribution of the outbound sector matches and by some accounts surpasses the value of the inbound sector. It's a significant contributor to UK GDP and it makes a very healthy contribution to Her Majesty's Treasury. Our sector employs hundreds of thousands of people across the UK. In fact, we believe that around 7% of the labour force in the UK is connected to tourism in some way. As you may know, in Thomas Cook alone, we employ more than 19,000 people in the UK. Let's not forget, too, that UK holiday makers spend a significant amount of money at home in preparation for a holiday abroad. ABTA's own research indicates that 29% of UK holiday makers will spend in excess of £500 before going abroad. And over 60% of holiday makers spend at least £200 before they embark in their overseas holiday. So we believe that holiday makers therefore should be able to choose the type of holiday that appeals most to them, free from government intervention. Yes, Thomas Cook supported the Visit England campaign. It made sense for us commercially. We are, after all, the biggest retailer of UK holidays. But my view is that the government should be supporting across the spectrum. So when the first UK TV ad was shown, you'll have seen Our Wonderful World ad alongside it too. And perhaps to get the level playing field, I should have sought government funding. Our approach has been one that we think others should follow. After all, the British public do both. They take domestic holidays and they go overseas. They don't necessarily choose one over another. It's down to timing, money, experience, education, and certainly after the last few weeks, the weather. Recent research we've done shows that UK holidays are no cheaper than going abroad. No argument to that. And we did our research before the budget, so if you stay at home now, you have to pay VAT on a Cornish pasty. What we ask is that the government doesn't distort a functioning market with more microeconomic meddling, particularly spending unnecessary money raised from hard-pressed taxpayers when you're pushing hard on austerity and tax raising elsewhere. So, that then makes me question if the government is committed to a thriving overseas holiday market, an industry that employs up to 2.5 million people, one that helps to bring 22 million tourists to the UK and 47 million overseas. You might question this. Despite much joined-up lobbying, particularly from last year's Travel Matters, the government has steadfastly failed to listen to the industry's concerns on APD. And despite repeatedly saying travel and tourism is one of its key drivers, the tax only increases. The Chancellor expects to collect £2.2 billion in the current fiscal year from APD revenues, and this will rise to £3.9 billion in the year 2016. These are by far the highest aviation taxes in the world. So this is a holiday tax, pure and simple. It's a stealth tax that targets hard-working Middle Britain. It's equivalent to less than a penny on income tax. But I believe the Chancellor would rather take the plaudits of lower direct taxation while sneaking in indirect taxation, which we collect. But this isn't just a one-dimensional problem. There are real and very serious implications for tourism destinations. Let me give you an example, if I may, of Egypt, or rather, unfortunately, it's Cairo, its capital. This populous year-round sun and beach destination, or rather its capital, lies just beyond the 2,000-mile limit for short haul. Egypt bookings have been in decline from 2009 as higher APD pushed prices higher. although this was initially masked by the Arab Spring. What happens if we and our holidaymakers avoid Egypt as a destination? The consequence is that most of the 30% of their population who work in tourism become threatened with unemployment. Indirectly, and of course unintentionally, we, or should I say our government, has created mass unemployment in Egypt. This in turn threatens the ongoing stability of that country and potentially of the area around it. So, should we be asking our hoteliers in Egypt to drop their prices to accommodate UK holidaymakers, in reality giving their margin to the UK government, a sort of Robin Hood in reverse? That feels somewhat unlikely. And in fact, many Egyptian hoteliers are trying to retain employees and provide against social breakdown in Egypt. So, the government has refused to change the banding for Egypt. Multitasking. So I don't subscribe that we should be raising an extra amount of money for the UK government and threatening the Egyptian economy. Because if you look at unintended consequences, it may be that the same government will be called on to give hundreds of millions of pounds of aid to support a country that may be threatened with economic instability. We look to the government to think about the world picture and the knock-on impact of their policies. We'll manage our commercial business, but they need to run UK PLC and how that interacts with countries across the world. Increasing APD also has an impact on inbound tourism. Airlines are clearly taxed as they depart the UK, so visitors to the UK, the Chinese who've been to Bicester Village, returning home have to pay more tax. We believe this impacts the same UK PLC. We see that as a deterrent for people to come to our country. And we see it very personally in Thomas Cook. If we bring, say, Manchester United football fans into the UK from Dubai, Scandinavia, and other parts of the world. So, APD. Only 5 European countries levy any form of international aviation tax. Of those 5, Britain's is by far the highest, and our APD has increased threefold since 2001. As I've highlighted, 2.2 billion of holidaymakers and business travellers' money will go to the Treasury. All this does is make the UK less competitive. It impacts tourists and their decision-making to come to the UK. It also means our own holidaymakers, when they go abroad, are paying more for their holiday than the people they're sitting next to in sun lounges, just because we impose this tax for them to leave the UK. So, the Dutch realised the damage APD was doing, and they removed it. They took that bold step. Why do we ask the travellers to and from the UK to pay this unfair levy? We've called for change, and I think we have to continue to do so. The government needs to assess the damage APD is doing to our economy against the tax take that they make. The demand for flying has decreased as APD has increased. The UK has suffered more than other European countries. It needs a proper assessment rather than a dogmatic defence of microeconomic meddling. So, we've talked about the rises in APD. Now we have emissions trading as well, another tax on aviation. There's no plans to offset ETS against APD. APD was the green tax. Now, conveniently, it's not. APD needs to be referred to as a tax on flying. It's now at a level much higher than the cost of the environmental impact of flying. And yes, aviation should pay that cost, but APD represents far more. So, that was APD. Perhaps moving on to the blanket, what about other issues that we face? If we think about protection, when you go and buy petrol, when you go and fill up your car, we're all in it together. But that's not necessarily true when we go abroad. When you think back to the ash cloud crisis, the Arab Spring, in fact, any event when UK citizens are stranded abroad, Given that the UK travel sector has the experience, it's no surprise that when the government needs help getting people home, Thomas Cook and the other operators are there to help stranded UK citizens. It's what we do. It's part of our obligation. At the same time, it's also something that the UK travellers expect. They're stranded for reasons beyond their control. They expect the government to step in. But it shouldn't be down to tour operators to lead, pay, and do that as a matter of course. So, when an airline does fail, the issue of protection for individual travellers becomes a matter for general consumers, not just the industry. We agree that consumer protection is required, but it needs to be clear to consumers and consistent and transparent to the industry. At present, it's still confusing. As we all know that on aircraft, it's not unusual for a package holidaymaker to be sat next to a fellow traveller who has just booked an airline seat and as a result hasn't paid their ATOL contribution. We want to create a level playing field. At the moment, to compete, what do? We level the playing field down. We sell our seat-only capacity as non-ATOL to remove consumer protection. But this shouldn't be the case. This is against our instincts. It really seems odd that the air travel protection scheme run today by the CAA doesn't include seat-only travel. The right to be protected shouldn't depend on how you book your airline seat. We might all have taken flights or even travelled when we've not been covered. However, as we heard, and as we all know, the slightly better news is that the Civil Aviation Bill continues its progress through Parliament. It's great that this will start to reform ATOL. These clauses are an essential but absolutely not a final step towards including holiday scales by airlines within the scope of the ATOL scheme. You heard Justin refer to Theresa Villiers, and she said very, very clearly that she's pledged to consult on holidays sold by airlines entering the ATOL scheme in 2013, once the Civil Aviation Bill has become law. It's a clear signal that the government is taking seriously industry calls for action, and one we thank them for. But it is critical that we keep up the pressure for the inclusion of airline holiday sales within ATOL at the earliest opportunity. Until this happens, the scheme will remain confusing for travellers and unfair for tour operators. In recent years, the UK travel industry has faced much discussed pressures from events around the world and the financial situation in the UK. Add to this the pressures on the retail sector, and it's a question of being squeezed from all sides. But what about the wider implications of retail rents and rates, of the barriers to employing more people on the high street, and archaic planning regulations, which mean that out-of-town shopping is out of control? We in Thomas Cook employ 9,000 people across our stores, and yes, you'll have read about tough decisions we're making to ensure the longevity of our high street business. But what's also tough is the pressure on employing people in the first place. Our workforce, and indeed our industry, is historically one that attracts young people, many in their first job. And many of our senior executives in the industry across the board have started in this way. This means that we have to invest in training. Within Thomas Cook, our apprenticeship scheme is one of the best, and each year we employ more than 250 young people. Our challenge here is the impact and how the government affects the minimum wage and how it affects the apprentice minimum wage. Our aim in Thomas Cook is to promote good employment across the country, and that affects zones that may have economic challenges as much as areas that have economic growth. A steadily rising government-managed labour cost will mean that we will have to manage our costs down and therefore reduce employment levels. So travel employs a large number of young people and a large number on apprentice schemes. The low margins of our business mean we have to keep our costs well managed. Increasing minimum wage will only lead to less young people being employed in travel. And I think I'd just like to remind you of the three themes, and perhaps the three anti-themes of it. We need the government to get the infrastructure right. The anti-theme to that is, you've got to do it in a joined-up way. You can't do it in a disparate way. The second theme is that we want a level playing field, whether that be in enforcing regulation or in putting regulation in place. And the anti-theme of that is, let's not constantly meddle at the micro level. And then the third theme is, we see our job to run our companies commercially. We see the government's job in managing UK PLC. And it's about thinking around those unintended consequences, such as impacts on overseas countries and how that may affect overseas budgets and overseas aid, we'd ask you to always consider. So, I thank you for your patience, particularly as I nearly expired up here. But I look forward to taking part in the panel session. Thank you.